Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com. In this video, I want to flip an idea on its head. When you tune into YouTube, a lot of the times you'll see people such as myself who are reviewing new gear, new equipment, new plugins, but I thought it would be good to take a look back into time and review some old plugins, vintage plugins, if you will, that have stood the test of time. So let's jump in here, let's listen to a little bit of this song, and then let's get a list going here of plugins that are still as applicable today as they were back when they first came out. So we've got this really cool 80s inspired pop tune. I figure since we're talking about vintage plugins, it might be nice to hear it on a vintage sounding style record. I don't know. I think it's neat. Anyway, the first one that I got to point out here is tried and true. This is RVOX. RVOX came out in the Renaissance Bundle, which was released by Waves, I think in 1998, but maybe as late as 2000, making it anywhere from 22 to 24 years old. And I can tell you, I use this plugin all the time, almost every mix. Many of your favorite mix engineers probably do. Many of my colleagues that I've spoken to are still saying, yep, RVOX still holds up to this day. We can solo this vocal here. I'm going to bypass RVOX. We can play a little bit of it.
'Cause I'm no longer eat or sleep. Boy, it makes me quiver.
Bring in the RVOX.
'Cause I'm no longer eat or sleep. Boy, it makes me quiver.
Really holds down the dynamic, puts a nice little tension, brings up all the little nuances, and has like this kind of like low mid saturation thing that's really cool. Great plugin. I use it all the time. Okay, next on the list, we've got Digidesign Lo-Fi. This is going to be one of the oldest plugins in the list. It came from the original Digidesign plugin pack, which I think came out in 1991, I want to say. So we're talking way back. All right, let's check out this percussion loop. So with distortion plugins, a lot of the times they can be very transformative, a lot of the times they can be very subtle. I oftentimes use this very subtly, just like a 0.1 to 0.3 on this little distortion knob is enough to bring a piano or acoustic guitar or electric guitar, just make it pop out of the speaker a little bit more. But in this particular case, I wanted to use this to create the effect of like an old sampler running into like kind of a not so high-end tape machine, really crusty, really gritty, and this is what I got. So you hear like a little bit of noise and some like weird fuzzy clipping and stuff like that, and it just sounds great in the context of the record. Sounds awesome. Now, this next one here came out in 2002 and then was updated in like 2005 or 2006, and I have to apologize to this plugin because I've really been neglecting it. It is a great plugin. This is the PSP Vintage Warmer and Vintage Warmer 2. They're very similar. There's a couple updates in the Vintage Warmer 2, but it's great for so many transformative things. You can get like subtle compression out of it, you can get like totally radical compression out of it, and then you can go under the hood here like I've done here, and you can get like a whole ton of mid saturation, less high saturation, less low saturation, kind of customize the saturations that you're getting from it. And so I use this to kind of give it that like 80s texture top end where there's like almost a filminess. It's kind of hard to describe. It's like an exciter sort of quality to it. Worked really well, so I'm going to play through the verse without it and then play through with. Those are level matched, by the way. I just want to point that out. I think that of all the plugins on this list, this one is probably the most slept on. If you haven't used this plugin in a while, go back to it and check it out because it really is worth it. Really, really cool. I use it again actually in the bass on this record. So our original bass starts like this. I just wanted to bring all of that top end stuff to life, all those like sort of vocody guitar talk box kind of texture things that are happening. Here we go. And that'll bring us to one of the newer plugins on our list, but still just into that sort of older, more dated category, and that's going to be MPC Futsbox. And I want to use this plugin because I just want to highlight the entire MPC line. I don't have the entire line because I have other things that cover the bases, but if you only got the MPC bundle, you would cover probably most of your plugin needs. They're really, really good. This plugin came out in 2009. The reason I'm using it here is there's a bass guitar layered on top of this bass synth. And it just doesn't really hold up to the synth. Like, it's just getting swallowed whole by this synth bass. It doesn't have enough personality, enough character, enough boldness to stand up. So I'm using pretty much everything that this thing can give you. Some noise, some filtered noise, some a sim, a convolution of a guitar amp, some distortion, and when we hear it before, really nothing like the after. And it doesn't sound like it has enough bass in it. It sounds a little too transformed when it's in solo, but let's listen to it in the context of the bass. Okay, now with it. So it has this really nice way of making it both blend with the synth bass, but also stand apart from the synth bass at the same time. So we're getting like the best of both worlds, and it's almost amazing to imagine that's even possible to make something stand apart and blend in simultaneously, but hey, look, we just heard it. All right, next I want to point out the Air plugins. The Air plugins came out around 2005. They are stock with Pro Tools, and I'm using them. I use them all the time. The entire line is great. But here I'm using them in two particular instances. I'm using the Kill EQ to completely eliminate the low end in this clap, and also bring up some of the top. And then I'm also using it on this snare to kind of make it sit down a little bit. A lot of the times we use plugins, we show off plugins of how we make something bigger, how we make it bolder. But sometimes it's important to get things to sit down a little bit. And one of the ways that you can do that is by clipping off a little bit of the transient of something. This actually allows you to have a little bit more room when it comes time for your mix bus compression and your final limiter. So you can get your overall record a little bit bigger sounding simply by reining in the most transient heavy material. And this snare definitely fits into that category. I'm also shaving off a little bit of the top, just kind of getting rid of some of the top tones. So in solo, we're going to notice that it feels like it gets smaller. Right, so we just lose some of that stuff. However, in the context of the mix, what we're going to find is that the snare is just a little too big. So all we need to do is just rein it in ever so slightly. And now suddenly the snare feels like it's mixed into the record. It belongs in because we've just removed some of the stuff that we don't really need. The extreme peak of the transient and the extreme top of the top end. All right. I would be remiss in doing a video about plugins or digital software that stood the test of time if I did not mention Autotune. My goodness. If if Autotune is not the most extreme example of software that's really old that is now defining our modern sound, it's got to be the most extreme example for sure. This software, when we're in classic mode, this is the algorithm that came out in 1997. So it stood up so well that when Autotune improved its own algorithm, everybody said, wait, actually we want that old one though, because we like the artifacts that it's creating. And that's actually how I'm using it here in this mix. Maya's tone is on. She doesn't need any pitch correction in this song. I'll bypass it real quick.
I just don't know what it is. I know it can't be nothing.
Like, she doesn't need any further pitch correction at all. But I like the tone, so I'm bringing it in for the tone.
I just don't know what it is. I know it can't be nothing.
Just gives it a little bit of that, like, sort of vocody gloss, that kind of almost metallic overtone, but not quite metallic. It's really hard to describe it, except for to say it sounds auto-tuney. But, I mean, gosh, when you're talking about an old software that has been keeping up with the times, I would say Autotune is probably the one that takes the cake. And the last one that I want to mention here is a unique one. This is the Lexicon PCM plugin. It came out around 2010, making it probably the most modern on this list, but it's an exact copy of the same exact proprietary algorithm used in the 480L. It's just now in the software package of a plugin. So the algorithms itself being used here, that's the oldest. So this is simultaneously, it's the most modern on the list and it's the oldest on the list. And I do have to say, this is one of the best sounding reverbs probably in the box ever. It's really hard to beat. So I'm going to play a little bit of it. I'm going to turn it up some.
I just don't know what it is. I know it can't be nothing.
And I'm using a really long pre-delay here, 120 milliseconds. When I turn it up, you hear that gap pretty distinctly, but when I have it turned down, we don't hear that pre-delay gap, and the reason for that is because I'm also blending in a slapback delay to kind of fill that gap in.
I just don't know what it is. I know it can't be nothing.
So the combination of the slapback and the extended pre-delay make it so that I can get a lot of reverb and a lot of delay on this vocal, while at the same time it always feels separate from the vocal, allowing the vocal to still kind of have its forwardness and boldness, which I think is a really nice technique.
I just don't know what it is. I know it can't be nothing.
Now, I also want to bring up an honorable mention here before closing this video out, and that is the Waves Q10. Now, the reason why I don't have this as part of the list is because at this point, I would say there are competitors to the Waves Q10 that do something similar and do it better. However, I use this EQ all the time. It is an inexpensive EQ. It is very, very much non-taxing on the CPU, and it still sounds really, really good. It still competes and holds its own against EQs that were released years and years, decades later. This is Waves' first plugin released in 1992, so that makes it 30 years old as of the making of this video, and I still use it all the time on everything. Lead vocal, bass, guitars, synths, samples, you name it. It's very versatile, very flexible, sounds really good. And I've got it on my vocal here doing a pretty extreme curve, by the way. This is not like a mild use of it. This is very distinctly on here. So just thought I would mention that. All right, let's tie up this video here. If you dig what I'm doing here on this channel, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification. If you've got any questions about anything that you've seen, or if you just want to chime in with some older plugins that you're still using that have been around forever and ever, I'd love to hear that, because maybe that's some stuff that I'd like to check out, or maybe I forgot to put on this list. So jump on into that comment section, let me know. And lastly, you know what we say here, we are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.